Hi, how's everybody doing? My name is Mike Waldrop. I'm one of the elders at Living Hope Church, and I've been asked to do a Bible study on Mark chapter 13, verses 14 through 27. Mark 13 is really full of a lot of Jewish history and references, and there's really a lot contained inside that chapter of the Bible, so let's dive in. The reading this morning will be from the New King James Version, and all the verses that I'll reference today are from the New King James Version. So Mark 13, verses 14 through 27. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who was on the housetop not go down into the house, nor enter to take anything out of his house. And let him who was in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter. For in those days there will be tribulation such as not been seen since the beginning of the creation, and God created, which God created until this time, nor ever shall be. And unless the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he chose, he shortened the days. Then if anyone says to you, Look, here is the Christ, or Look, he is there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. But take heed, see I have told you all things beforehand. But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars of heaven will fall, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send his angels, and gather together his elect from four winds, from the farthest part of the earth to the farthest part of heaven. So to look at this chapter, I think we have to look at it in context, which really starts at Mark 11 and goes through Mark 15. In Mark 11, it starts with Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem, and immediately he begins to get into a conflict with the religious leaders. He cleanses the temple, and the leaders start to question his authority, and they're trying to trick him and find a reason they can arrest him. And really what they'd like to do is remove him, because he's showing how corrupt that they've really become, that their focus is really on themselves and not on God or the people that they're supposed to be serving. This goes on through chapter 11 and chapter 12. Chapter 13, Jesus builds on that corruption and begins to prophesy about the destruction of the temple, the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, a tribulation that we'll talk more about in just a moment. And then he lays the foundation for understanding his death, his crucifixion and resurrection, and him coming again. In chapters 14 and 15 of Mark, we read about the betrayal of Jesus, his arrest and crucifixion, and resurrection. So Mark 13, Jesus predicts the destruction of the temple. He predicts a difficult time ahead for the disciples. He predicts a tribulation for Jerusalem and really ultimately for all people. He also reminds us that God has ultimate authority, that he's in control, and that he will continue to work out his plan for redeeming his creation through the sacrifice and return of his Son, Jesus Christ. So with this background, let's dig into Mark 13, 14 through 27. Mark 13:14 begins with a reference to Daniel. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, the prophet, standing where it ought not. This is a reference to Daniel chapters 12 and chapter 9. In Daniel 12:11 through 12, we read, And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits, and comes to the 1,335 days. Then in Daniel 9, verses 17 and 18, we read, Now therefore, our God, hear the prayer of your servant and his supplications, and for the Lord's sake, cause your face to shine on your sanctuary, which is desolate. O my God, incline your ear and hear. Open your eyes and see our desolations, and the city which is called by your name. For we do not present our supplications before you because of our righteous deeds, but because of your great mercies. This phrase, abomination of desolation, literally means a profanation that appalls. The phrase standing where it ought not literally means someone set up where they shouldn't be. This phrase is generally thought to be referencing a person or the representation of a person like a statue. During Daniel's time, the first temple was desecrated by the Syrian king Antiochus IV. His name is Greek, and Antiochus really followed a lot of the Greek thinking and Greek methods. But his Greek name means God manifest. So Antiochus literally declared himself to be God. He desecrated the temple by sacrificing a pig to Zeus on the altar of God. This misuse of the sacred altar of God and placing himself in a position of God is the profanation that appalls, or the abomination of desolation that was referred to by Daniel. Daniel's also predicting future profanations and men who will defy God and try to take his place. This reference by Jesus aligns with his prophecy, Jesus' prophecy, regarding the destruction of the temple and his direction to flee the city because of the coming tribulation. So next we'll look at more of Daniel chapter 9. These next verses are complicated and could be its own Bible study, so I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but I think it's worth covering a little bit because it ties in with Mark chapter 13. So Daniel 9:24 through 27. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times. And after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the Prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with a flood, until the end of the war desolations are determined. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. So this idea of 70 weeks really can be difficult to understand. Typically in the Bible, and there's several references around this, but typically in the Bible, a day is a year. So 70 weeks would be 70 times 7, or 490 years. The start of that period then really begins with the command that the Jews are to rebuild Jerusalem. And so if you do the math and you go from the time of Ezra, 490 years, it really brings us to the time of Mark chapter 13. So again, Jesus' prophecy and his reference to Daniel aligns with the prophecy that Daniel had made. Now Daniel's prophecy in Daniel 9:24 through 27 is a messianic prophecy. He's prophesying about the Savior. And so it's interesting that Jesus makes a reference to Daniel, and that from a timing perspective, that timing aligns with Daniel's prophecy to the time that Jesus is in Mark chapter 13. When Daniel prophesies in 9:24 through 27 about the destruction of the sanctuary, that aligns with Jesus' prophecy about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, both from a timing perspective and also just from a language and what we know of the history in that perspective. So again, there's really a lot in 9:24 through 27. It could be its own Bible study. It clearly is a prophecy about the Messiah. But what's interesting to me is the alignment between Jesus' prophecy and prediction about the destruction of the temple and the alignment with Daniel's prophecy in 9:24 through 27 and how that aligns with who Jesus is and the things that are to come. So starting in about 66 AD, which again, the timing lines with Daniel's prophecy, but starting in about 66 AD, the Jewish people revolted against the Romans. So the Romans sent an army to put down the rebellion. By 69 AD, most of the Jewish zealots or rebels had been pushed back into the city of Jerusalem. Then in 69 AD, Titus besieged Jerusalem and he built a wall around the city. Anyone who wanted to go into the city was allowed to enter. So during Passover, visitors and pilgrims were allowed to go in, but no one was allowed to leave the city. And no provisions, no food, water, clothing, medicine, no provisions were allowed to enter the city. The idea behind the siege, the Romans were trying to starve the Jews out of the city so that they could conquer Jerusalem. So in about 70 AD, the Romans did finally breach the final defense of Jerusalem. And when they did that, they went in and they massacred most of the people that lived in the city. They also desecrated and destroyed the temple. there's a lot of different stories around the desecration and the destruction of the temple. Some of those stories, or some of the history, seems to indicate that it started by accident, and once it started, it couldn't stop. Some of the histories and stories indicate that it was actually planned and it was intended. Either way, we know that the temple was destroyed and that the temple was desecrated. So Jesus' prophecy about the destruction of the temple and the tribulation that was going to come to the people of Jerusalem is confirmed by history. It also confirms Daniel's prophecy. What I think is really interesting is if we look at the historical record and that confirmation of Daniel's prophecy, Daniel also prophesied about the Messiah, and that prophecy aligns with Jesus' life and Jesus' actions and really what happened during Mark chapter 13. So again, that could be its own study, completely separate, but it's very interesting. And I think it has a lot to do with how we think and understand Mark chapter 13. So again, Jesus prophesied the destruction of the temple. He also prophesied the tribulation and the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, and that was confirmed by history. The city of Jerusalem and the Jewish people fought with the Roman army for over 4 years. And the end of that fight resulted in a siege of the city of Jerusalem, the massacre of most of the people that were in Jerusalem. I personally can't imagine being in a city for over a year, not being able to leave, having no food, water, or provisions coming into the city whatsoever. And then at the end of that time, having the city fall to the invading army, which then comes in and massacres most of the city. And then, if you manage to live through the siege, and you manage to live through the massacre, the next step, when the army desecrates the temple and destroys it, they're really destroying most of the history of the Jewish people and the identity of the Jewish people. So again, I can't imagine what it would be like to live through a time like that. You know, if you think about, some of us maybe have a little bit of an idea of being stuck inside a city for over a year. Again, with no food, no water, no provisions, no medicine, and then to have the city fall and to have everyone around you, all your neighbors, your family, your friends, be killed by an invading army, and then only to have the very thing that you identify with destroyed and desecrated in front of you. Truly, I couldn't imagine what that would be like. So in terms of a tribulation and how great that tribulation would be, I believe that prophecy by Jesus was fulfilled in Titus's destruction of the city and of the temple. So clearly Jesus' prophecy in Mark 13 is specific to the people of Jerusalem, but I also think that there's a broader implication of that prophecy. So we can read in Mark 13:19, it says, "For in those days there will be tribulation such as not been seen, such as not been since the beginning of the creation which God created until this time, nor ever shall be." So the phrase, the beginning of creation which God created, is redundant, which signifies some significance in the repeated word, the creation. This phrase indicates that while Jesus' prophecy of tribulation is specific to Jerusalem, and historically it's borne out, it is also meant for all of creation. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word sar, which means closely pressed or pent up or restrained, is usually translated as tribulation and affliction. In the New Testament, the word thalipsis, meaning pressing together like pressing grapes, a squeezing or pinching, is also translated as a tribulation. Over and over again, we see throughout the Bible and our own history evidence of rebellion against God and the hardship and tribulations that come from that rebellion. This also aligns with Daniel's prophecies and Jesus' prophecy. Jesus himself told us to expect to go through times of trial and tribulation. In John 16:33, we read, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world." Matthew 13:19 through 23. "But he who receives the seed on stony places, this is he who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures only for a while. For when tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, immediately he stumbles." And then in 1 Peter 4:12 through 13, "Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you, but rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. We'll all go through difficult times. We'll all go through times of tribulation. The Bible is full of stories and examples of people who went through difficult times. Famines, wars, persecution, sickness, droughts, all kinds of trials and tribulations. This all started with the fall of Adam and Eve. In Genesis 3:16 through 20, God says to the woman, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you will bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Then to Adam he said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it, and all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So Jesus has told us that we are all going to go through difficult times, times of trial and tribulation. But God has also provided for us a hope through all the troubles that we go through and any tribulation that we go through. And Jesus reminds us of this in Mark chapter 13. God is always in control. God is with us no matter what we're going through or what difficulties we're facing. And he has a plan for us. And he has a plan to redeem all of his creation. So in Mark 13:19 through 20, for in those days there will be tribulation, such as not been seen since the beginning of creation which God created until this time, nor ever shall be. And unless the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he chose, he shortened the days. And 2 Corinthians 4:7 through 17 says, but we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us. We are hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our body. For we who live are always delivered to death for Jesus' sake, that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So then death is working in us, but life in you. And since we have the same spirit of faith, according to what is written, I believed and therefore I spoke, we also believe and therefore speak, knowing that he who raised up the Lord Jesus will also raise us up with Jesus, and will present us with you. For all things are for your sakes, that grace, having spread through the many, may cause thanksgiving to abound to the glory of God. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. So we read in Mark chapter 13, and it's reiterated in 2 Corinthians, that God is in control. And God has a plan for us, and God is working out our redemption every day. Not only our redemption, but the redemption of all God's creation. This plan is going to culminate with the promised return of Jesus Christ, who will return and gather his followers from all over and restore the creation to God's original plan. Mark 13 is a lesson to us that we will go through difficult times, and we're going to experience tribulation, and we shouldn't be surprised. We shouldn't act lost or confused, or act like we don't know where to go or what to do. We know where to turn for help. When we experience tribulation, when we go through trials, we can always turn to God, knowing that he's in control and he's making a way for us. Mark 13 also promises the return of Jesus Christ. There will be a final abomination of desolation, one who will rebel against God for a final time. He'll deceive many, including many believers. There will be a final tribulation, and it will culminate in the return of Jesus Christ. But we can count on the promise of our redemption in Jesus Christ and his ultimate return to restore all of creation. In Revelation 7:14 through 16 it says, so he said to me, these are the ones who came out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. They shall neither hunger any more, nor thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any heat. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. So, this is a difficult time that we're currently going through. Again, God is in control. God has made a way for us. God has given us a hope and a hope of glory through His Son, Jesus Christ. If we keep our eyes focused on Him, we shouldn't be lost or confused. We shouldn't be troubled. We should understand that God is with us, God is in control, and God is making a way for us. And these things that we're experiencing are no different than what Jesus Christ experienced and what Christ Himself told us to experience. I hope, again, this all finds you well, and I hope this helps you better understand Mark 13. And until we can be together again, I just pray that God will continue to look out for you and give you peace and strength and continue to build up your hope for a better day tomorrow. God bless you all. Thanks.